parkour generations. London too is often home to the World Chase Tag events, which pretty much attracts the whole UK parkour scene to come to London and cheer on their favourite team.
He claimed the ovation over the mountain, and there it is! Unbelievable! It's grand. The whole stadium here has gone mental.
On top of all of this, parkour in London is still evolving year after year, with more and more people doing incredible things. So, to the councils around London, parkour in London isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I hope you guys really enjoyed that episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Whether you do parkour or not, I want to hear your memories of parkour in London, so make sure you drop a comment below. I want to thank all of my existing Patreons for helping make this video, and if you want to help support my channel and support the growth of this community, any donations to my Patreon. Peace! I'm about to show you something insane. In today's video, we're going to explore the incredible story of how being able to flip to a tiny handrail became possible. With clips like these being shared online constantly from the parkour community in 2020, it can be kind of hard to fully grasp just how impressive being able to flip to a rail is. And what's even more impressive is to be the first person ever to do this. Something I've always found really fascinating in sports in general is how the skill level of the sport can evolve, and it evolves by pioneering moments and collective improvements. That sounds a little bit wordy. I'll explain what I mean by that. In rock climbing, climbing El Capitan was considered impossible.
He had conquered the previously unconquered. Warren Harding and Dean Caldwell had made it to the top.
It took the first ever climbers in 1948 45 days to finish climbing it. Jump forward 70 years and Alex Honnold and Tommy Caldwell have climbed it in under 2 hours.
I wasn't sure that we were actually going that fast, so I saw the timer and saw 157 when I got to the top.
The recurring thing I see in every sport pioneers. This iconic flip precision to a rail was performed by a British freerunner by the name of Max Barker in the Motus Project's video Resurgence. This clip alone can be seen as a moment when parkour movement evolved to another level. So, how did this all become possible? Before we get into it, I need to thank David Witchell for the incredible research you're about to witness. Simply put, David is a genius, and if you want to see some of his work, including the lighting he did for Stora's Night Shift video, check out the links in the description. Anyway, Max's flip precision is just the tip of the iceberg. To see how this all became possible in the first place, we need to go back to 2007. Country, Latvia. A country known for its creativity and fearless mentality, Latvia has bred many of the world's best freerunners. The most followed freerunner on Instagram is Pasha the Boss, who is from Latvia. His friend Stanislav Lazden is also from Latvia, and you can see many incredible clips of the two training together. But finally, and most importantly to our story, is Oleg Vorslav. Oleg was one of the very first ever freerunners to take flips and do them to gaps. But we'll look at Oleg closer in a moment. If you have a keen eye, there is one thing you'll notice between these freerunners. They are all insanely creative. Latvia, for whatever reason, seems to be the birthplace for the most creative freerunners on Earth. It's important to our story to see how there's different mindsets towards parkour and freerunning based on where you are in the world. The Latvian and Eastern European attitude towards movement has mainly focused around creativity. And it would be this focus on creativity that would later influence the flip precision a decade later. Many Eastern European freerunners, such as Oleg, seem to love incorporating flips and spins into their movement. Whilst, if you take Britain, for example, we focused on big jumps with really clean landings. Oleg was one of the first people to ever flip across a gap. I'm not sure if this is the first one, but it's certainly one of the first. In 2007, people just weren't flipping gaps, and then Oleg came along and just did it. This flip gap was groundbreaking at the time. However, there is something important to notice. Not to discredit Oleg in any way, but this flip he done is called an aerial. It's essentially a cartwheel with no hands. At no point in an aerial can you not see where you're going. Unlike Max Barker's flip to a rail, there's no moment of blindness. The landing is in your line of sight the whole time. However big of a game changer this moment was, the parkour and freerunning world had a very long way to go before flipping to rails. There was a very key thing missing before you could consider this a flip precision, and that is precision. I kid you not, this is the third time I've recorded this part of the video. Let's just get back to it. As the name suggests, a precision is a jump with a precise landing. Flipping between a gap doesn't require a precise landing. It requires momentum, aerial awareness, a lot of bravery, but no precision. I seem to recall this fascinating time in the parkour community around 2010. In this time particularly, the British mentality towards parkour was the polar opposite of the European mentality. You see, the British mentality towards parkour was to do everything extremely precise. Like, every jump was super clean and controlled. If you hadn't landed a jump with a perfect landing, you wouldn't consider the jump complete. The Eastern European mentality was, well, not that. When you watch Oleg's 2007 video, you see big flips, you see the beginnings of creative movement, but what you don't see is precise landings. In general, precision just wasn't the focus of the training. It was more about the creativity. This was in stark contrast to the UK, where at the same time in 2007, if you were to look at Phil Doyle's barefoot parkour video, the main difference you will notice is this one thing. In Phil Doyle's video, you see nothing but precision. On the flip side, pardon the pun, creativity was at the core of the free-running mentality in Eastern Europe. Clean, precise landings wasn't. For a flip precision to ever become possible, both creativity and control would need to come together. The Eastern Europeans were pioneering a totally different form of control that the British often overlooked. And that was a control in the form of aerial awareness. I've got a really good example of this. If you look at Toby Sager's iconic dive Kong bail in Lisbon, and then contrast that with this clip of Alex Zulia in a very similar situation. If you look closely, you see something very fascinating. Both of these bails were effectively the same mistake. Both of them came into the dive Kong with their hips way too high. However, Alex saves himself, and Toby ended up in the hospital with a broken collar. This again can be seen with a British freerunner by the name of Greg Ennis, who also overshot a massive dive Kong. So what separates these bails? Well, whilst the British were focusing on control and precise landings to keep themselves safe from injury, all the way over in Eastern Europe, they were focusing on aerial awareness. This aerial awareness would allow them to react mid-air and bail safely. And instead of a broken collarbone, they might just have a few scrapes or bruises. This ability to bail safely allowed Eastern European freerunners to attempt absurd movements with little risk of actually hurting themselves. So absurd ideas like doing a flip to a wall would become less absurd. Anyway, back to Latvia, and more instances of Eastern European progression were starting to appear. For example, Oleg Vorslav's incredible Out of Time video all the way back in 2009. And specifically important is Oleg's reverse vault over a gap. That line and many of the lines in this video still hold up to today's standards. Between roughly 2008 and 2010, we would start to see the very first examples of what today we would call a flip precision, or a flip pre. Many of these were happening in Eastern Europe, but it's really important to note that a few instances of flip precisions were starting to happen in the UK. Notably Ben Jenkin in 2008, which is insane, Daniel Ilabaka in 2009, and Scott Jackson in a very similar time period. Albeit that many of these were very low-risk injury-wise, these were still very progressive moments in sport. But then, everything changed, with one clip from the legendary Russian freerunner, Shade Zlat. Shade was a very pivotal freerunner in the early 2010s, and I think his influence on modern day freerunning is often overlooked. This clip was a game changer. This was a high-risk flip gap across a far distance, which also required a pretty high level of accuracy. And not even to mention that the takeoff and landing walls looked sketchy as hell. This pioneering moment opened the floodgates for what was about to come. Between 2011 and 2013, nearly every freerunner was doing flip gaps, and the distances were getting bigger and bigger. Looking back at that historic flip gap that Shades landed, there was an insane level of control and aerial awareness. But one key thing was still missing before we could call this a flip precision. And this brings us on to the next part of the story. In order for Max to be able to flip to a rail, he needed not only aerial awareness, but insane levels of precision. So, at some point, these two mentalities, British and Eastern European, had to meet. So, how did that happen? To find a possible answer to that, we have to go to 2010. The same year as Shadeslat's iconic flip gap, people were starting to host international parkour jams, and they were becoming quite common. Athletes from all over the world would meet up, train parkour together, and most importantly, influencers. A team by the name of Crap, yeah, that's their name. It's spelt with a K, in fact. Crap were hosting these major international jams. At the time, I'm sure the point of these jams was simply to enjoy parkour. However, it's my belief that these jams, without anyone really knowing, would revolutionise parkour forever. The location for a lot of these jams was Italy, and it worked as this perfect mid-ground between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. As we started to see these two continents training together, we started to see them influence each other. And we started to see more and more European freerunners attempting flip gaps that would have previously been very uncommon. Around this era of 2013 to probably 2015, flipping to walls or objects was becoming more common, with some particularly notable moments coming from America. Marvin Ross and Daniel Arroyo. As well, Alfie Green did this incredible side flip to a electrical box. Kai Willis did this insane side flip pre at IMAX. Jesse Peveril, he was starting to do flips to walls. And there's probably no coincidence that this clip of Jesse was from one of those international crack jams. However, there's still one thing. If you look very closely at the landings, you couldn't really call these precisions. None of them landed with 2 feet stuck on the corner of the wall. And that was a fundamental piece of technique that was missing before Max Barker could do a flip to a rail. Someone was going to have to invent a brand new technique, and along came this one clip of Matthias Mayer showing a totally new and unique way of flipping to a wall. In this short clip, Matthias performed a hybrid flip that would go on to develop a flip precision. It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment that this technique was created. I think this is pretty close. In roughly 2014, a handful of German athletes had started to progress a brand new technique. To be able to land on a handrail, you need your 2 feet facing forward. If you tried to do a normal side flip to a rail, you would land with your feet like this. And then they would probably do something like this. And you don't want that. I've done that. You don't want to do that. If instead you did a front flip, your feet would be coming out the right direction, but when you do a front flip, there's a certain period of time where you can't see the landing. And that period of time is way too long to be able to consistently land well. This new hybrid flip allowed for the best of both flips. It's the perfect balance of being able to spot your landing and be able to land with your feet facing forward. With this brand new technique, we are very close to what we call today a flip precision. This technique was further progressed by a training partner of Matthias called Janice Schauer. And then finally, Janice performed a flip precision to a rail, all the way back in 2014. This single clip pretty much told the parkour world that this is a thing now. And that brings us to March 10th, 2017, and the release of the Motus Project's iconic video, Resurgence. breaks down after the first minute of incredible parkour. We see a 15-year-old Max Barker run up, flip across a far distance, and then land on a tiny handrail at waist height. And then straight into plyo and swing through cork. From Oleg's first ever flip gap back in 2007, filmed on a potato, all the way to 10 years later, when this incredible feat. Moments like these are what makes sport so important.
Hey, my name is Max Barker. I'm going to talk to you about how I came to do scientific rails and training partners with loose stones. We saw on Instagram people, dabbling with flip precisions. As we went out training, we would just hunt for opportunities to maybe give some a go. Over time, these scientific precisions started to develop technicality instead of just landing on the object, turning the flip into more of a precision, so landing and sticking the jump.
What's the plan? Yeah, cycle 3 onto the rail.
I looked at the rail and I said, yeah, I can probably cycle to that. And then that's where it began. Your brain doesn't go through too much thinking. The fear's just sort of in the back of your head. You're mainly thinking about what you need to do to pull off the move. So I do remember running towards it the first time and then going for it and sending it. My heart was beating after I landed on the rail, and then as soon as I popped off the rail, it was just sort of relief. But it was a good feeling to take it off the first time.
Iconic, game-changing moments built on the back of an entire community's progression across the day that manifest themselves in a single 6 seconds. Since Max's flip pre at Canada Water, flip precisions have become a new normal in the world of parkour. I mean, I've even tried it. I of course landed on my head. That's not my point. When I started parkour 10 years ago, we used to literally joke about being able to flip to a rail. I can't stress how absurd the idea was. It was a joke. It was literally a joke to us. And then just 10 years later, we have Dom Tomato confronting from one handrail to another. I can't even begin to imagine where parkour will be in the next 10 years. I want to close this video on a quote that stresses the importance of mindset when it comes to progressing in sport. Taken from a TED Talk by David Epstein called "Are Athletes Really Getting Faster, Better, Stronger?" Athletes have a different mindset than they once did. Have you ever seen in a movie when someone gets an electric shock and they're thrown across a room? There's no explosion there. What's happening when that happens is the electrical impulse causes all of their muscle fibers to twitch at once, and they are throwing themselves across that room. They're essentially jumping. That is the power contained in the human body. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video. I really loved making this one. Make sure you subscribe and leave a comment. Let me know what parkour evolution I should make a video on next. Thanks to all my Patreons, and if you want to help see this community grow, consider donating to my Patreon. Any donation is much appreciated. Peace. If someone from the general public saw a tricker, they would very often assume what they're doing is called parkour. And it's this age-old problem that has not only upset people who do parkour, but also the trickers who have longed for tricking to be acknowledged as its own sport. So there have been times where trickers and freerunners haven't really got along. The two would often make fun of each other.
What do you do? I do parkour. I do parkour.
Gymnastic sprung floors is where trickers and freerunners often come face to face. These have become these tense, Cold War-like zones, as each side would battle for control of the sprung floor. The trickers believed the floor was theirs by birthright, so they would use the full radius of these floors just to practice a round of backflips. But freerunners believed that the sprung floor belonged to them, so they would obnoxiously slap these big foam blocks in the middle of it so that they could launch themselves through the air and practice dive bombs. But alas, as time passed, so did this tension. Trickers and freerunners realised they weren't that dissimilar. And now, in 2021, the relationship between tricking and parkour is closer than ever. So close, in fact, that some might wonder, is tricking taking over parkour? In today's video, we will explore exactly that. As a side note, the parkour bucket list is out now on my website. It's been really cool seeing you guys tag me on Instagram with your completed posters, so I'll leave a link to that below. To start off, tricking and parkour are fundamentally different sports. Unlike parkour and freerunning, which people have pedantically argued over for the last few decades, tricking is very much its own separate discipline, with its own unique heritage and its own culture. Originally dubbed sports martial arts, tricking evolved from combining the more aesthetic side of martial arts into these sequences of tricks. There's no obstacles or anything, other than the floor and a human body. Objectively, what a tricker is trying to do is seamlessly flow in tricks one into another. But as a result of using flips, tricking has often been lumped in with parkour and freerunning by the general public.
Trickers, tracers, freerunners, it's a whole new language.
Which has annoyed both freerunners and trickers. Despite these two sports being trained quite differently, there is a lot of overlap. For starters, when it comes to the tricks that trickers do, most of those tricks freerunners will also do. Certain connective moves that trickers will do between tricks might not be seen in freerunning, but most of the movements are seen in both. Also, much like freerunning, tricking doesn't really have any rules. There's nothing really telling you what you can or can't do. If you can think it up in your head, you can do it. This is distinctly different from gymnastic floor routine, despite being done in the same location.
Difficult routine starting at a 6.9 in difficulty.
In gymnastics, there's an extremely strict rule set for what flips are allowed and what aren't allowed. For instance, corks, side flips, and most of the flips that you see right here, none of these would score a single point in gymnastics. They're quite literally illegal in On top of this, there's even more overlap because trickers train in gymnastics settings, which is where you will also find freerunners who are trying to learn flips before they take them out.